So it's nice to know that we've got agencies like Legal Aid, Senior Resources, the Tri-County Protection Team that are out there working on the behalf of vulnerable adults. But when you're dealing with vulnerable adults at Legal Aid, and what type of issues are you dealing with then at Legal Aid? What comes across your desk?
Well, what we often see in this arena, unfortunately, is a growing, in fact, it's got to be an epidemic. When I first started practicing law about 30 years ago, it was domestic violence was getting to be the cutting edge area in the law and was beginning to get the notoriety it deserved. Nowadays, what we're seeing as an epidemic and just is a growing problem is the people taking advantage of, scamming, the vulnerable adult population.
You're targeting them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Targeting is a perfect word, and the number of scams get both more numerous and more creative.
And very sophisticated.
Absolutely,
Yes.
Yeah.
I think too, older adults, I think many times still have landlines. They still have the phone numbers with their phone numbers listed in a book,
right.
Where a lot of the younger generations has cell phones and whatnot. And again, back to the older generation might have phones that don't have caller ID on them, so
right.
They don't know who's coming in. They pick up the phone and can get easily kind of enticed into very savvy salespeople.
That's
or
correct.
Fraudulent type of sales techniques right on the phone. And then the mail is another whole business where older adults read their mail carefully and they look forward to their mail.
Right.
And there's some sophisticated pieces coming through the mail as well.
That's correct.
So.
And one of the symptoms that we see is as part of this process is it involves, usually the characteristics are pretty much the same, whether it's the targeted person receives the scam offer by email, by snail mail, by telephone, sometimes stored at the door,
Sure.
and sometimes their identity is stolen. But the classic characteristics are, one, the person has to act immediately.
So beware of anything that needs a fast response.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they will not allow people to, or they get frustrated by seniors who want to discuss it with a spouse, a trusted child, with an attorney,
You'll have
or
to
whatever.
mail me something, I'll have to think about it.
Exactly.
They get frustrated by that.
They
so
do.
Those are clues and cues
Yep.
right there.
They must act immediately, and if they don't act immediately, the second prong of this is either they're going to miss out on something very good in their lives, or something very bad is going to happen to them or to a loved one. And those are kind of standard red flags for these scams at the beginning of the scam to try to lure the target into falling for the scam.
And back to, we're talking about vulnerable adults here,
Right.
who so easily fall into these types of, I would call them traps.
Right, yep. And unfortunately, too, in our society, Maggie, I'm seeing more and more that the person who is targeting the victim is an adult child of the person.
So
And
I was going to ask you if that is, so that's the trend, the most almost trusted person you would think would be a family
Right,
member.
yes.
But not only that, it's an adult child.
Yes, we often see adult children as perpetrators of these scams, where they will access and take thousands of dollars, and also in real estate and automobiles from their elderly parents.
And again, we'll probably say this a couple of times, but if you're an elderly parent, and maybe you are thinking that your children have taken advantage of you, but you're so afraid as to how to start recourse.
Right.
What would your advice be to one of our listeners today that thinks, boy, I'd really like to talk to somebody about what's going on in my home, but I want to do it safely and in an environment where I can kind of control what's happening?
Right.
What would you suggest to that older adult listening who thinks maybe they themselves are being targeted by?
Right. Well, we've talked before going on the air and about the wonderful gateway resource in this community where they can call 211. Just those three numbers, 211, and that's a gateway to all of the resources that are available, not only in this arena, but in all different types of arena. But at legal aid, if they wanted to contact us, of course, an attorney-client relationship remains a secret. There is confidentiality built into that. But many times trying to motivate, particularly an elderly parent, to take action against an adult child is complicated because, one, they're sometimes afraid of the child. They're embarrassed that they fell for this scam by the child, or they also don't want to see something bad happen to their child, either for me to file a lawsuit or for the prosecuting attorney's office to issue a warrant and have them prosecuted for that. And that can get frustrating sometimes for us because we can advise them about the fact that they have been taken advantage of, but they won't, as I say, they won't drop the leash.
Well, let me ask you this about let's just call it a good neighbor policy. What if you're living next door, or you're in a situation, maybe you go to church and you suspect the adult children are taking advantage of mom or dad, and that mom or dad, for just the reasons you stated, aren't taking action, but are certainly being, if you want to call it abuse, it is a form of abuse. It's exploitation.
Yep, absolutely.
Can a friendly neighbor, a concerned person, make a report? Can they remain anonymous? Can they phone in, say, to Adult Protective Services and make a complaint? Or?
And that was the resource I was going to suggest, because all referrals to Adult Protective Services are confidential.
So they can be anonymous, so somebody can get the ball rolling. And will Adult Protective Services always look into?
They will at least
due diligence.
They'll do an investigation, and they've got someone on call 24 hours a day. And some of the listeners might be familiar with Child Protective Services. That it's very familiar to a lot of to the viewers. But Adult Protective Services performs the same kind of function for the vulnerable population who are no longer children.
So it's really our first and best recourse as concerned neighbors and friends to use this service.
Absolutely.
And again, you can always dial 211 to get the number, because Adult Protective Services has numbers for Oceana County, Muskegon County, and Ottawa County. They're different. So 211 is always the right place to start to find what we call an APS number. But if any of our listeners have a pen and paper, the actual number for Muskegon County's Adult Protective Services is 733-3612. 733-3612. And we'll probably say that again. But I like the idea that you said, use that community resource of 211. They'll hear what you're concerned about, be it you're the elderly person yourselves or a concerned person, and point you to community resources.
Correct.